Hi everyone, and welcome to the Mental Health Family Hour. Now we are doing a bonus episode for World Mental Health Day, and we have 4 wonderful guests joining us today. So today is going to focus on eating disorders, and just to give a little bit of housekeeping before we start, if anyone wants to ask any questions following the release of this episode, then please do email me on sam.tyrer, so that's Tyrer at lscft.nhs.uk. I know some of the things that we talk about today might be quite triggering for certain individuals, so please do reach out for support. You can also go on to Google or download an app called the Hub of Hope, and this will basically give you a platform where you can type in your postcode, and it will basically give you a list of services available to you in your local area. So my name's Sam, by the way. I'm the co-host of this show, and I'll just hand it over to Dave to give a very brief introduction to himself as well.
I'm Dave, and because we're pre-recording today, I have significantly less to do than usual, but I am someone who has lived with an eating disorder myself as well, so it's a big important thing to know is that they don't just affect women, they do affect men as well. So I might chip in a little bit about that, but otherwise I'm going to sit back and listen to what our wonderful guests have got to say.
Perfect, thank you. I'm just going to go around my screen, and can I ask Kat just to give a brief introduction to yourself, please?
Yeah, so I'm Kat Riaz. I'm a GP working in the North West. I'm also a GP working in specialist interest in eating disorders.
Perfect. And Hope, please.
My name is Hope Virgo, and I am an author and mental health campaigner. I spend most of my time in schools, kind of raising awareness around mental health and particularly eating disorders, and then spend the rest of my time doing a lot of campaigning work. So working closely with the government, do a lot of work with Department of Health, looking at eating disorders, making sure the right policies are in place, and have most recently set up a coalition to try and kind of bring together experts to change that in the long term.
Brilliant. And I'm sure many of you will have seen Hope on BBC News or other platforms as well, as I have. So thank you for being here today. And Sam?
Hi everybody, I'm Sam Mortimer. I'm the Associate Director for the Eating Disorder Service within LSCFT. My other role is around working through the improvement processes around Eating Disorder Service, so developing the Eating Disorder Service. I am an RMN and I'm still a registrant from that perspective, been an RMN for 30 plus years. I've had some significant recent experience from an eating disorder perspective in terms of my former trust. I equally as Hope did, but not quite so eloquently, have lobbied to get a service developed in my former organisation where we didn't have an eating disorder service. So yeah, as I left, we just mobilised a new service. So I'm really interested and passionate about developing eating disorder services locally.
Brilliant, thank you, Sam. Oh, your introductions have been great. And Rebekah.
Hi, I'm Rebekah. I was diagnosed with anorexia in 2017, and I'm a current service user of the Lancashire and South Cumbria Foundation Trust. Also a service user representative for the Eating Disorders Transformation and Improvement Team, and participation ambassador for the All Age Eating Disorders Service at Pendle House in Nelson. I'm currently studying for my Masters in Psychology, and then hopefully in a year's time I will start my training to be a clinical psychologist.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rebekah. So how we're going to start this talk is Hope and Rebekah have both come on basically willing to share sort of their journeys. And just to say, first of all, really do appreciate you both sharing. I know how difficult it can be. So I'll hand over to you first, Hope, just to give an insight to your life and how you've got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. And do feel free to stop me if I start going off on a tangent as well. So I developed anorexia when I was about 12, 13. Looking back, I would say some of the reasons why I developed it was I had quite a dysfunctional family growing up, was kind of the fixer in my family, always trying to navigate situations, making sure that everyone was okay. I was also sexually abused when I was 12 years old and had no idea how to deal with that, had no idea how to process it, and kind of left the abuse feeling like there was something categorically wrong with myself that I had to change, and just didn't feel good enough, didn't feel lovable. And for me, that's when the eating disorder started to present itself. And I did start off quite slowly, kind of restricting here and there. I did a lot of long distance running, so kind of upped all of my running. But over kind of the next 4 years, I realised that actually the more I was doing those behaviours, the better I felt about everything. And it served a purpose in that moment to kind of keep me safe, to keep me motivated, and to also numb a lot of the emotional stuff that I didn't want to feel. Eventually, after 4 years of hiding it from everybody, my school did get in touch with my mum. I then went to my doctor and then was finally referred to Children's Adolescent Mental Health Services. Spent about 6 months at CAMS as an outpatient, going kind of every single week for appointments, every single week lying, pretending like I was fine, that everything was fine. But actually at that point, I was really, really unhappy. I wasn't able to accept that I had anorexia. I didn't think anyone got it. I didn't think anyone really understood. But eventually then, after kind of that 6 month period, I ended up being admitted to a mental health hospital, where I then spent the next year of my life in recovery and having treatment there. And I guess before we open up the conversation for the next kind of hour or so, I just do want to emphasize that I was in treatment kind of 12, 13 years ago. And 12, 13 years ago, there wasn't this massive rush on eating disorder treatment. There was enough service out there. And I guess for me, it's really important to emphasize that, because I know that there'll be people who listen to this who maybe are sitting on waiting lists or trying to get support. And maybe you've been told you're not able to get support, or you're not underweight enough, and whatever it might be. So I guess just that reminder that actually don't compare your story or what treatment you've had to the treatment that I've had as well. So yeah, I guess that's kind of me. I'm now in a state of ongoing recovery. So I spent a year in treatment, and during that year learned a lot about myself, but also learned to accept the illness. And have ever since then kind of been in this ongoing state. I think I've had moments where I thought I was fully recovered, but then coming through a relapse about 5 years ago, I realized that I just kind of settled at where I was. And over the last year and a half with the pandemic, having more time to think about things, I'm really kind of pushing for that final bit of my recovery now. I do believe that every single person can fully recover from an eating disorder. And I know for me, I'm nearly at that space. It's just pushing for those final kind of moments.
I think, first of all, I just want to say I'm extremely sorry for hearing about what you went through when you was younger. I can't imagine how difficult that was for you. And thank you for sharing that. I think my first question to you would be, you spoke at first in regards to potentially you actually neglected the fact that you felt that you didn't have a problem. At what point did you actually think, there's something not right here, and you came to accept the fact that you was struggling with an eating disorder?
Yeah, so it was interesting. I think over the 4 years when I was kind of really in the kind of the grips of it, there were moments in that 4 years when I'd go out with my friends and they'd all be eating and drinking and be totally okay with that. And I'd have these moments when I was kind of sitting with them in restaurants and was like, why can I not do that? Do they all get up the next morning and feel really guilty for what they've had and spend hours ruminating over every single thing they've eaten throughout the whole week? But I just thought maybe it was normal and maybe things would be kind of okay and it would somehow work itself out. Mm-hmm. But I think for me, the real moment where I kind of realized that something wasn't quite right was on the Friday night when I was in treatment. So I'd been in hospital for 3 days and had spent the majority of my time kind of lying down and being encouraged to eat. And on the Friday night, one of the nurses came in to see me and she brought with her these massive pieces of paper. And she marked on the piece of paper where my head was and where my feet were and asked me to draw how I thought I looked. So I kind of knelt down on the floor and drew this outline of my body. And then I had to lie down on that exact same piece of paper and she traced around me. And then I stood up and looked back down at that paper. And for me, it was in that moment that actually there was concrete evidence that my body image was so distorted. And I think it's a really interesting one because my kind of bad body image didn't cause me to develop an eating disorder. And I think quite often with eating disorders, we get so fixated on the body image aspect when actually they're so much more complicated than that. But the body image is something that for me became so intrinsically wrapped up in it that actually that was the evidence that I needed to just think, do you know what, actually something's not quite right with the way I view myself. So maybe what these people are saying, there is something in that and maybe I need to give it a go. So it was that for me, I guess, that moment of acceptance. But then over the next year, kind of continuing to push and challenge myself and kind of realizing that the eating disorder, even though it made me feel invincible, actually it wasn't helping me in the slightest.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you took up long distance running as well. Obviously, I talk about running, but this isn't the direction I'm going down. Did you find that when you was actually losing weight, that you actually tried to tell yourself that, I'm losing weight because this is going to benefit my running, for example? Because I do know within sort of the fitness industry, and in particular things like running, long distance running, quite often people can sort of say that to themselves, I need to be light for running, it will benefit that. Did you ever try to sort of mask it with that, or?
Yeah, I think you can pretty much convince yourself of anything, and convince yourself that what you're doing is normal and it's safe and it's healthy. And particularly when other people pick you up on it and comment on it, you've got every single excuse going. And I think that was the really frustrating thing actually with the kind of my relationship with running at that point, was I had really, really enjoyed it, did a lot of cross country, like competed, everything like that. But then when I was kind of 14, 15, I absolutely hated it. But then it was like something I had to do, like this thing that if I didn't do, I'd feel really guilty. Mm-hmm. And I think that's for me when the relationship with the running changed into something that became something quite detrimental to me and my health.
Yeah. And did you find that when you did start to struggle, did any of your friends notice and actually approach you to say, are you okay? Or was it something that they was quite negative about?
So no one approached me. I don't think anyone really noticed. I'm only 31, but I think when I was growing up, people didn't really talk about eating disorders like they do nowadays. When I relapsed about 5-6 years ago, my best friend Nikki actually did approach me about it and was very direct about what was going on. But I think part of that was we'd known each other for such a long time, and she probably felt more equipped to talk about it as well. So I think it was one of those things that just went under the radar. And I think it always, with eating disorders, a lot of the time it comes back to the fact that we judge the severity of an eating disorder based on what someone looks like, which is wrong on so many levels. Mm-hmm. And I think because I didn't look at that point like I had anything going on, anything was the matter, people probably just didn't really realise. And again, I think particularly kind of in modern day, we get so fixated on complimenting people's weight loss that actually sometimes if we are complimenting someone's change in physique, for all we know, we're complimenting someone's eating disorder. And so for then that person, if they're getting complimented for looking a certain way, mm-hmm. it then can cause a very negative spiral in their head. And they then think what they're doing is normal again.
Yeah, I'm going to let Dave come in there because I know that we actually spoke about this in one of our training days the other day. So I'll let Dave come in there.
Yeah, it's one of the it's everyone says it's a minefield. How are we supposed to talk to people about eating disorders? Because we always thought it's okay to kind of compliment someone, but it does give that idea that your value and your weight and your appearance are somehow linked. And it was definitely one of the big contributing factors to my eating disorder. I grew up with non-purge bulimia. So my binges outweighed my restrictions when I was younger. So I became very overweight. And then when I started to lose weight, I was doing it by very heavy restriction and then very controlled binges. I was just reversing the order of it. And this was kind of celebrated, because I was in the fitness industry at the time. It was celebrated as intermittent fasting. But the thing was, I'd never got compliments my entire life. I'd had people comment on me in a negative way about my weight, but I'd never had compliments before. And the chasing after those compliments became one of the big addictive factors for me, is the fact that, okay, you always assume that when people are giving you compliments, when they stop giving you compliments, well, they're not feeling that way about me anymore. It's like if someone says you look good today, and we hear the word today, it's like, what do you mean today? It's like, did it not look good yesterday? So I definitely got hooked, not just on the behavior and the lifestyle, but the sort of feedback that was coming from people.
Dave, do you want to ask any questions to Hope as well?
No, I'm quite happy with the ones you're asking so far. So
perfect. What I'll do is I'll move on to Rebekah, and then we'll have some more questions after Rebekah's as well, to both Hope and Rebekah. Is that okay, Rebekah?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so I was diagnosed with anorexia in 2017 at the age of 39, which I suppose is late onset anorexia. However, if I'm being totally honest, I would say I'd probably been poorly for a while longer than that, maybe a couple of years before. I was later diagnosed with depression, body dysmorphia and anxiety. For me, it started as a diet that went too far, I think. At least that's what I thought until I went into therapy. There was another reason why the anorexia developed, but I'll come to that a bit later. So kind of at this time, when I was first diagnosed, I was only consuming around 400 calories a day. And I was burning around 550 calories doing 1.5 hours running on a treadmill. So the 400 calories was kind of made up of around 5 safe foods, and that was it. So obviously my nutrients were lacking in that department. So anyway, when I was diagnosed, I was severely underweight. I think physically my body was probably shutting down. I was having issues with my heart, which was only beating at around, I think it was something like 40 beats per minute. And every ECG that I had, there were a lot, came back as abnormal. And I remember the nurse who was looking after me at the time, she literally begged me to stop exercising on the treadmill. And she said my heart could stop at any minute. I didn't. I did carry on. I think the eating disorder at that point was too strong. So what I did do when I was running, and I ran 5 days a week, I used to leave the front door unlocked so that if anything did happen, my husband could still get in, which sounds daft now. I also had chronically low white blood cell count. So obviously I think my immune system wasn't functioning as it should at that point. My hair started to thin and fall out, and my period stopped for 2 years. And basically, my bones started to stick out, and that's when I got a lot of pain. It was painful to sit. It was painful to sleep. I had to have cushions under me when I sat down. Everything, like my pelvic bones, were all exposed. So they were basically, the physical symptoms that I experienced. In terms of treatment, it was only through an intervention from my amazing husband. He actually rang the GP without my knowledge, and they actually brought me in under the pretense of a health check. I was kind of suspicious. You don't often get a letter saying, come in for a health check. But anyway, the health check, I was weighed, and the nurse who weighed me was absolutely horrified at the weight that I was for my height as well. And it was only after that I finally admitted, I think, to myself that I actually had a problem. And the GP then referred me to the eating disorder service. And the problem there was that when I got my letter through for my referral, it was for 6 months' time. And at that point, I actually rang the GP back and said, I'm not going to make it another 6 months. I know that now. I was on very much a downward spiral at that point. So she did actually ring the eating disorder service, and they got me in earlier. I only had to wait 4 weeks. So although it was difficult, I made it to the appointment. So in terms of the therapy, I had a bit of a shaky start with a different therapist. But then I was put in the care of an amazing clinical psychologist, and she literally saved my life. And, for that, she will always have my eternal gratitude. The work we did together, actually, we discovered that in my childhood, there was a trauma that I hadn't dealt with. And that trauma was quite a bad case of bullying. In fact, the psychologist actually said it was the worst case of bullying she'd ever come across. And apparently this trauma was buried so deep that when I had a time when I felt I had absolutely no control over my life, I didn't even know who I was anymore. It kind of reared its head as anorexia. So basically, I've actually had my last session of therapy today. But the work we've done together, we've resolved with my issue. She's built my confidence up. She built up my self-esteem. And, she basically gave me the skills and tools that I can call upon, now my therapy's over. What I will say is recovery is an arduous process. I still battle every single day. I battle with the eating disorder. I battle with food. I still have a problem with exercise. And obviously the thoughts in your head are a constant battle. And although my body's healed, I think the mind definitely takes a lot longer So for me, there's still work to be done. But I will get there. And I think, like Hope said, I think it can be beaten once and for all. So that's my story.
Thank you for sharing that, Rebekah. You know, I know how difficult that must have been, and I'm sorry once again for what you've been through as well. And you know, what a celebration today in regards to actually having your last meeting or bit of therapy today. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think just to ask you a similar question, what I asked Hope is what actually was the point that you accepted the fact that you had an eating disorder?
I think for me, it was the moment when I went in for the health check. When I got on the scales, I wouldn't look at the scales. I couldn't look. But she actually read my weight out, and when she said it out loud, and I was just under 7 stone at that point, it came home. I was pulling the weight of a child as opposed to a grown woman, and I think that's what frightened me. And I knew I was going down, on like a downward spiral, and I thought, it's just going to go down from here, kind of thing. I think that's when I got scared, I think, at that point.
And did any of your friends try to reach out to you at all, or?
At the time, I would have said no. However, over the last few years, they did say to me that they did try and have subtle conversations, subtle hints that you're looking a little bit thin, you know, your hair's looking a little bit thin, but I didn't hear them. I didn't hear what they were saying to me at all. So in that respect, I was a bit ignorant. Yeah.
Dave, do you want to ask any questions, by the way? Because I ended up taking over.
No, I've got a few for when we get further into it, but they just wouldn't fit right now. So
it's interesting that both of you have mentioned exercise within your lives. Do you often find that with anorexia and other eating disorders as well, that actually maybe excessive exercise does sit hand in hand with some of these eating disorders? Is that quite common with the majority of people that struggle, or is that not always the case? I suppose that can go to anyone.
I would say it probably is the case, because I think people use exercise as a compensator. So, you know, if you exercise for an hour, you can have something to eat. That's the way I saw it. You can, if you run on the treadmill for an hour and a half, you can have something to eat. If you don't run on the treadmill, you can have nothing. Yeah. That's what my eating disorder was telling me. So it was a case of I basically ran on the treadmill to keep myself alive, because it meant I could eat something after that. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
I think as well, the other thing to, I guess, added to that at the moment particularly, and whilst we can't blame the government for eating disorders, and I know we're not going to get too political, but I do think that often there's some really unhelpful messaging out there, mm-hmm. Which tells us to kind of eat less and move more. And I think sometimes that can play into kind of the narrative that we all tell ourselves in our head, whether you've had an eating disorder or not. I think people can get quite influenced by that.
Yeah.
And I do also think what I've seen over the last couple of years, and something that I've had to be very mindful of with my own recovery, is not switching behaviours. So I think if you haven't dealt with the behaviour, if you haven't dealt with the kind of, I guess, the triggers and the trauma or whatever it is you've been through, there might be a tendency that you start eating again, but then you replace that kind of, I guess, the way to numb the emotion. Instead of calorie counting, maybe you start to exercise more. So I think quite often people can cross between those kind of two factors, between exercise addiction and eating disorders, without necessarily having a way of dealing with what is going on. And for me, it's always been about, like, once you understand like what purpose that behavior, whether it's exercise or food, is serving, that's when you can start to break it down and actually step away from those behaviors as a coping mechanism. But it takes time and it's challenging and everything like that, which obviously you need some additional support in some cases to do that.
And how, if someone has got an issue with exercise, for example, how do they identify that? Would that be excessive guilt if they missed a workout, for example?
Yeah, I think that was what it was for me, just feeling really guilty if I wasn't doing enough, and then sitting with a lot of the uncomfortable emotions, which is why so much of the time in recovery from an exercise addiction, you have to just challenge it, and you have to sit with those feelings and those emotions and find other ways to deal with them, whether it's journaling, whether it's venting or talking about it. And I think the more we do that, then the more you can learn to trust your body and realize that actually our bodies are so intelligent that they will change up and things will get better, whatever. So it is, gaining that trust back, I think.
Yeah. And you mentioned social media as well, and this goes to yourself as well, Rebekah. Did you find that social media did have an influence on you struggling as well? Was that a contributor to yourselves or not?
No, I didn't actually have a problem with social media. For me, it wasn't an issue. During the illness, I used social media, as daft as it sounds. I used to scroll through pictures of food. That was my thing for social media. But and I wouldn't say it influenced the eating disorder, not for me personally anyway.
Is that the same for yourself as well, Hope?
I don't think I've found it made it worse. I think it's hard not to compare sometimes on social media. And I think that's why for me it's always really important that people are really mindful about what they do and don't share. Mm-hmm. But I think social media often gets like a really bad rep when actually it can be really helpful for people to kind of get that understanding that actually people get what they're going through. It connects people as well. And if you're looking at the right stuff, it can be really, really helpful. But it is just, I think, taking ownership of it and getting that balance right. But I do think from the work I do in schools, at the moment, we can't ignore the role that social media plays on, like, more broadly on mental health and that pressure to look a certain way, all of those kind of like modern societal ideals that are just impacting us on a day-to-day basis. And I think particularly given the last year and a half with everyone spending so much more time at home, like a lot of people have had a lot of time to just sit there on their phones, scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And even though, yes, you might not be reading everything, we're all comparing, we're all constantly judging. And in some situations, I think it can be quite triggering. And I think linked to that, actually, with social media is the fact that over the last year and a half, we've seen a lot of these kind of like wellness influencers popping up, which I feel like are the bane of my life at the moment. And they're like telling people what they should eat and drink and how much exercise they can do. And I'm like, what they're saying is not even accurate. But because they've got millions of followers and like a blue tick and look a certain way, we just think everything they're saying is like a gospel. And I'm like, no, this is not right. But I think, again, it's like people just need to take ownership of what they're looking at. And we probably need to do more to manage that and make sure people aren't sharing that unhelpful content. But at the moment, I think it's hard to navigate that.
And a lot of young people are looking at these influencers, shall we say. And I think what a lot of young people need to get in their heads is many of these influencers have actually bought the likes and followers. You know, that is a real genuine thing that a lot of these individuals are doing. So actually, when you think these individuals are relevant and their content that they're posting is genuine, you should take it as factual. You know, a lot of the time it's a complete lie. So, you know, if you are a young person watching this, please understand that when you are comparing yourselves to these individuals, quite often it's not the truth. I could rant about that all day. It's something I'm very, very passionate about. So what we'll go into now is we'll ask Sam and Kat. I know she just whizzed to the door quickly. We've mentioned anorexia, and I just want to touch on some other eating disorders as well. And if you can explain exactly what they are, that'd be fantastic. So first of all, what is anorexia?
I guess that's probably a question for me. And you know, if you look at the actual definition of anorexia, the diagnostic manual that you look at, and I guess in a basic term.
I've lost volume from you, Kat. Sorry.
Pardon?
I lost volume from you. There you go.
Yeah, couldn't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Sorry. Do you want me to start again?
Yes, please.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Okay. So what is anorexia? I think, you know, if we look at the diagnostic criteria for anorexia, it's a restriction of energy intake relative to the requirements, leading to a significantly low body weight. In the context, you know, we have to look at the age, the sex, the physical development, and physical health. And along with that, it's an intense fear of gaining weight, and also a disturbance in the way that one views themselves. So typically, as folks that, you know, actually experienced, sufferers feel that they're actually in a very large body, whereas they're actually very, very underweight. And
then so some other eating disorders as well that are quite common is bulimia and also binge eating disorder. But obviously, we've got purge bulimia and non-purge bulimia. Could you just give a brief explanation to what those are as well?
So bulimia is, let me go with binge eating disorder. So it tends to be when people eat a large volume of food in a very short period of time, more than an individual would normally eat. as a compensatory action for something that's happened. So, in response to emotions. But there doesn't tend to be any compensatory action. In bulimia, we tend to, again, it can be that some people binge on large amounts of food, but there would be compensatory behaviour, so meaning vomiting. Yeah,
perfect. And then just to ask as well, has there been an increase over the last 18 months, which you've seen both yourself and Sam? Have you seen an increase over the last 18 months?
I would say massively so. Even in my work in general practice, I can see with individuals every week who are newly presenting with movement disorder. And I'm sure Sam will be able to tell you we've had a huge increase in referrals into movement disorder service.
Yeah, we've seen, as an organisation, from an LSCFT perspective, from our eating disorder service, we've seen an increase in just about 50% over the last 18 months to 2 years, with an exponential rise happening during COVID. I would also say that the referral rise has been more so with children than it has been with adults. So it's our under 19 pathway has seen the greatest rise in referrals.
And can I ask, as this is to anyone, does anyone have an opinion, on why that has happened, do you think?
I think some of the things that we've kind of picked up on is that it's that early intervention and prevention, or the early prevention and intervention, early detection and intervention. Obviously, with children not being in school, young people not being in schools, obviously, we're getting people that were being referred to the service that are probably more poorly as well than they were at a later point in that development of the eating disorder. So we're seeing not only more referrals, we're starting to see people with much more complex needs that have become far more unwell as a result of the eating disorder. So I guess anecdotally, we're considering that that's because of those lack of connections and that lack of touch points that people might actually have had some awareness and understanding that something was starting to develop with the isolation that the children will have had during COVID.
And do you find that because obviously with COVID we can't control it, do you think that a lot of young people have turned to food, for example, as something that they can control, which in turn has led to issues arising?
Yeah, I agree with that. Certainly with kids, I mean, it must have been terrifying to be a child during the pandemic, hearing little bits and pieces of information, all this terrifying information on the news, but not actually having the ability to understand it. And a lot of them turn to food as a way of controlling their emotions. And so certainly we've seen, a lot of children with problems, and a lot more acutely as well. Mm.
Dave, do you want to come in, by the way? You had questions.
Yeah, that was all. I was just going to say about the control thing, but also, even though stress isn't the be all and end all, stress contributes towards a reason why a lot of people eat, especially with binge eating disorder or bulimia. Stress comfort eating can be a huge contributor towards that. And we really can't underestimate just how much extra additional stress and uncertainty people have been under over the last year as well. I mean, I've noticed an increase in overall coping mechanisms amongst my clients. So, alcohol use being up, drug use being up, video gaming being up, all of that stuff, anything that a person uses to escape being up. So it'd make perfect sense that this would be included in that.
And going back to the exercise thing, pretty much the only thing we were allowed to do was to go out and do exercise. So it also kind of links in that way as well, is that that's all we were encouraged to do. So people focused on that, and then there's that loss of control and spiral.
Especially as well as we've talked that a lot of people use the exercise as a compensatory sort of coping mechanism instead of the food. So when you take away that coping mechanism, I know that my eating disorder very much popped up a lot in the last year, because you'd think, I've taken away the exercise, that'd mean the demand for energy on me is less, therefore I would eat less. But I was eating as a form of escapism again, even myself. So I know that, I know that's very anecdotal from a sort of focus group of one, but I'm willing to admit that.
And I think also I was wonder whether there was a lot of people pre-pandemic who were kind of functioning at a high level with an eating disorder and with those unhealthy coping mechanisms, whether it was really exercise, kind of going to the gym a lot, whatever it was. And actually then COVID happened. And then it pushed those people into a situation where they weren't able to numb the emotion through the unhealthy coping mechanism. And so that then spiraled the eating disorder to either come back or for them to develop new habits that maybe they didn't have already. And I think something that I've seen a lot of is those those functioning people, and mainly kind of functioning, I guess, in adulthood, where they've just not really had any of the right support they need. And so they're still functioning, trying to kind of keep doing what they're doing, but it's not really working.
Can I ask as well, we've mentioned briefly around body image issues and body dysmorphia, which is going to be one of the questions to come into from the public. Do eating disorders and body dysmorphia or body image issues always sit hand in hand or not?
It's a big no from me, but
yeah, I would say not always, no.
Okay. Dave, I feel like you want to add to that.
Oh, I was waiting for the professionals to do that.
Sorry.
You are a professional.
Well, okay, right. Yeah. So mine started not from body image issues. My body image issues came as a byproduct. So I didn't really hate my body. I just hated my life. You know, I was going through trauma myself. I was being bullied in school every day. And I turned to food for control, and then the body image issues started coming, but only because I was being bullied for knowing things in school, for, you know, being the nerd or the geek or whatever. And then I started getting bullied over my weight, but I still didn't really have much of an issue with my weight. And I know it surprises a lot of people. I don't talk, you know, when we're talking about eating disorders, I try not to talk too much about the numbers of my weight loss, but I lost about near enough 50% of my body weight. I lost a huge amount of weight. And I actually hated my body more at the bottom than I did at the top. And that was because at the top, I was like, okay, I'm overweight. That's my one problem. And at the bottom, that was when my body dysmorphia really kicked in, because that was when I got obsessed with the scales. That was when I got obsessed with checking myself in the mirror from different angles with underneath different lights, and, you know, measuring myself, pinching at everything. That was when I noticed my stretch marks. The stretch marks were there when I was bigger, but I noticed them more when I was smaller. And I could pick out about 1,000 faults with my body when I was, you know, for what the industry looks at me and says, that's the best you've ever looked.
It's in regards to sort of the young people, especially stepping forward. Quite often, we always presume that it's mainly young women that are struggling. Have you seen an increase in young men struggling as well? Has there been an increase in young men in particular over the last 12 to 18 months?
Anecdotally, from those that end up in my clinic, yes.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot more men in the past couple of months than I have done before.
Right. Yeah. Right. So we'll go on to questions now from the public, and then we'll have a brief discussion at the end. I'm just trying to get through this because I know we're conscious of time. So the first question is, does poverty increase your chance of eating disorders?
Oh, go on, Kat.
I don't just want to pinpoint someone. I don't want to put pressure on someone.
We're starting to answer yourself.
This wasn't really something that I'd thought about before, but I did a quick search, and as far as I'm aware, there's a handful of studies that have investigated the link between high levels of food insecurity and eating disorder pathology. And it does, if you kind of look at the summary, it does indicate that those who kind of have less access to food are at greater risk of developing an eating disorder. But to what extent, I don't know, I'm afraid. I don't think there's huge amounts of study being done.
Does anyone else want to add anything to that, by the way?
I mean, from my clinics, I've seen people from all walks of life, all society. So yeah. I think it affects everybody.
Yep. And the next question that we got sent in was, what is the difference between eating disorders and disordered eating?
So I'll take that one as well.
Anyone again?
So I think that's a difficult question because it's all on a spectrum, right? From kind of normal eating behaviour to diagnosed eating disorder, and somewhere in the middle you've got eating difficulties or disordered eating, and somewhere between the two of them. And so when we look at normal eating, I think in a simplistic way, it's an individual's ability to mindfully consume food when hungry and stop when they're full, and eat a variety of foods and respond to their body's normal cues without any negative psychological or physical consequence. That's what I would term normal eating. And disordered eating is absolutely right. As we said before, we live in a world full of diet culture and preoccupation with physical appearance. And, many individuals manipulate their food intake. And for some that works, but for others it can progress and very rapidly slide into a diagnosed eating disorder. And I think when I've got somebody sat in front of me and I'm thinking, have they got eating difficulties or have they got an eating disorder? It's not as easy as kind of looking at the actual definitions of the disorder and trying to slot people into boxes. So I kind of think to myself under 4 headings, and that's behaviour, obsession, functionality, and how it affects them physically. So to explain a bit more about that, I think about behaviour. So what behaviours are we doing and how often, what's the frequency of the behaviours and how many kind of eating disorder behaviours are we engaging in? And then I think about obsession. So it's totally normal to think about food when you're hungry, but for those struggling with an eating disorder, it's all consuming. You think about it all the time. It impairs your focus, it impairs your ability to stay present. So that's kind of how I fulfill that, that bit. Functionality, I think about how their eating behaviour impacts on their life and their ability to function in society. So are they able to work from the other friends? Do they fear judgment? If we go to work one day and forget to pack lunch, should we pop to the corner shop and just pick something up and eat it without any fear of having any repercussions? And physically, what harm is coming to them as an individual as a consequence of their behaviours? What are the physical parameters that are causing problems? And then I put all that together and kind of come up in my own head with what I think is the issue. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that helps to answer that.
No, that was brilliant. Thank you very much. Do you think, because with the work that I do in schools, there's a lot of teachers that have said to me that they've seen an increase in disordered eating. Do you think that the lack of routine over the last 12 to 18 months has contributed to that with young people?
Definitely, because, I think when people are at school, you get up, you have breakfast, you go to school, you eat lunch with your friends, you come home, you have tea with the family. There's that routine, and the loss of that, people sleep in, they skip breakfast one day, the next day, I skipped breakfast yesterday, I don't eat breakfast today. And it escalates from there. The actual kind of splitting disordered eating from having a diagnosed eating disorder, it's kind of arbitrary. If you've got eating difficulties, you need help with them. They're impacting on your life. You don't have to have a diagnosed eating disorder to be able to reach out and ask for help.
It gets so hard, doesn't it? Because there's so many sort of fad diets that go around that it can easily sort of take you away from what is considered normal eating to an extent. I've got my own experiences of that, and it's such a minefield, especially with social media and seeing, juice plus, do this, do that. And, I think sometimes when you actually get into doing one of these things, it's quite hard to return to some form of normality from my own experiences. Has anyone sort of got any advice on that or
yes,
any comments?
Very, very simple. You go to a plumber to get your plumbing done. Go to a nutritionist to get your nutrition done. Don't take advice off footballers or celebrities. It's like, if that person isn't a nutritionist, I've told this story before, that when I was a personal trainer, we all just jumped straight into giving out meal plans. And then I started studying to be a nutritionist, and I had to sign a document to say, I will not give out nutritional advice because it is unethical to do so. And that was whilst I was studying nutrition. That's whilst I was going above and beyond the other people in the gym that I was in. They all carried on giving out nutritional advice. I was like, I'm not having my license taken away from me, thank you very much, before I've even got it. And so I basically backed off. But that's the whole thing, is that no one's regulating. No one's regulating, Ronaldo coming out and saying, here's this thing on how I got my abs. And it's like, there's pictures of you with your abs at 16 before this thing was made. It's like, you're lying to us. And also, you're one of the directors of the firm.
I took advice. So I'm very open about the fact that I struggled with my mental health, gained a lot of weight, ended up losing the weight in probably quite an unhealthy way. And I got quite obsessive with trying to lose a little bit more. And I took some guidance off someone that I knew at the time about how to do this detox for 3 weeks it was. And I ended up eating certain foods and cut out certain things. And because I'd restricted things that much, it led to me really, really struggling with my relationship with food. So I ended up sort of restricting everything. I'd eat excessive. If I had one bit of sugar at the weekend, I'd binge excessively, then reduce it on a Monday. And I kept going around that repetitive cycle. So as Dave said, don't just take advice off random people. Make sure that they are qualified to do so, because it did lead to me struggling with an eating disorder. And I'm quite open about that. But yeah, please don't take advice off random individuals. Hope, did you want to come in there at all?
No, I just guess to echo all of that. I think it's so important that we're mindful of where we are reading that stuff and also who we're speaking to. Someone that I always recommend is Renee McGregor, who like cuts through all the rubbish around nutrition and exercise and everything, and offers that additional advice within a safe space to do that, whether it's on social media, whether that's kind of with her directly. But I think it's important to I think for me, what's been important in my own journey is to just get to a space where all food is neutral and no food is going to trigger a certain response or certain feelings. And I think the more you unpack the eating disorder, and maybe that's when maybe it becomes, again, an eating disorder over kind of an unhealthy relationship with food, is as soon as you start to unpack why you're doing those behaviours and what's actually going on. Because the eating disorders aren't really about food. It's like a sign that something else is going on. So I think quite often we get so stuck on the food. And then when you're in recovery, you're like, why am I obsessing over food? Because I don't care. Like, it's not about that. So I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah, kind of, I guess, getting to that safer space as well. But I do want to kind of echo what Kat said as well, as I think the more, like, as soon as you feel like any sort of food behaviours or exercise behaviours are having an impact on your life, whether you think it's like a minor impact, I do think that's when you have to start trying to get that support and work out who you have around you to get that support, because there's a very kind of small line between it crossing over into a full-blown eating disorder.
Definitely.
And at points you won't even realise.
And I think for me, from my perspective, I took advice because someone looked good. So actually, he looks fantastic, so I'm going to do exactly what he says. There's a big difference between how someone looks and what is actually healthy. So please, if you are watching this, just be careful in regards to this. And Renee McGregor as well is absolutely fantastic. I can vouch for her as well. Does anyone else want to contribute to that section before we move on to the next question?
I guess finally, sorry, just off what you just said, was just that reminder that, like, I could eat exactly the same thing as anyone else on this call and exercise the same amount, but we would probably still look completely different.
Definitely.
And I think that's quite often we think that if we just do exactly what a celebrity's doing, or an influencer online, we'll look like them, when actually the reality is we won't. And we've got no idea what is going on for them mentally. And for every single one of us, like, being healthy can look completely different. So I think sometimes it is about, for me, definitely was about going back to actually what is healthy, like, what does that mean for me, and is that looking a certain way, or is it actually having my body functioning and working in the right way?
Yeah. This will flow quite nice into our next question, because we've talked about body image here. So what is the difference between body image issues and body dysmorphic disorders? Anyone again?
From my point of view, as a lay perspective, I think body image for me is, for example, somebody's not happy about the way their arms look or where the stomach looks. For me, body dysmorphia is when I look in the mirror, I see something completely different to what I actually look like. It's completely different. And as well, I think with body dysmorphia, for me, it's all about going off about what Dave said about checking in mirrors and stuff at different angles and the different lights. Anything reflective, you find yourself checking. You know, it's the first thing that I do in the mornings sometimes is check. So for me, from my perspective, they're very different. But yeah.
Really good explanation. Now, does anyone else want to come in there?
I think I would just kind of echo what Rebekah said, is it's about kind of functionality. So body dysmorphic disorders, very definition is it's a preoccupation with imagined defect in appearance, and as a consequence, there's kind of negative emotions that come with that. And the preoccupation is so powerful that it stops an individual from being able to function normally. It's the body check-in, it's spending hours in appearance, feeling too self-conscious to go out and interact with their friends. Whereas negative body image is similar, but it doesn't necessarily come with the impaired functionality that you get with this body dysmorphic disorder.
Mm-hmm. So they don't always sit hand in hand, but can one lead to the other?
Oh, undoubtedly, yes.
Yep. Yeah.
One thing to add on that as well is kind of what Hope said before about when she was having the nurse drew the feet, and then Hope went and drew the outline. That I think is a really prime example of body dysmorphia, because Hope saw herself as one thing that wasn't objectively what she was. And it's really important to say as well that we often think that this is people that think they're not skinny enough or not slim enough, but this actually also affects people who think they're not muscular enough as well. So and that can lead to a lot of things like steroid use or whatever it might be, because a person thinks of themselves as tiny when they are actually pretty stacked.
There is a term for that, isn't there?
I thought that was just body dysmorphia in the other direction, but if there is a different term for it.
I think there's various kind of unofficial terms for it.
Right.
Like
not swollen enough.
Yeah, not swollen.
I don't think there's anything kind of formal.
That's me being gullible to social media. That's So the next question is, young people are struggling so much with their body image. How can we help them love who they are? That's it's quite a deep question.
I think I just picked that up from a perspective of, sort of being a mental health nurse, but also for being a mum and a human being, in terms of, around just that positive regard, not focusing on somebody doing well or looking good because of a particular body trait or I guess it isn't even just about bodies, is it? We we judge people far too often, don't we, on saying, oh, your dress is lovely or your hair looks lovely, or it's about actually encouraging people to feel that beautifulness that isn't actually about what your body looks like or what you're wearing or what your hairstyle is, and encouraging that positive self-respect for you as an individual. And that comes with us encouraging that in our younger people, doesn't it?
I think, I definitely agree with all of that. And I think as well, like, learning as an individual to kind of interrupt the negative thoughts that you might have about your body. So I know in the past I'd stand in the shower and look down at myself and my brain would just go into like just so much hatred for my body. But actually getting to a space where now I can interrupt that, and that's what I do. And it's not always about coming back and saying how beautiful and amazing you are, but just by kind of redirecting your thought pattern, I think really helps. And I think the other thing as well is realizing that what you might be feeling about your body isn't factual, and actually it could be that there's something else going on. So I know that emotionally, if I'm having a difficult day, I tend to project all of that onto my body. And now I'm able to understand that, again, can kind of work through that. And then I think the final big thing for me is like having those mantras in place where you can constantly be telling yourself, having those mantras where you can constantly be like, actually, my body's the least interesting part of myself. Like, and just those reminders every single day, I think help to just get into a more natural kind of habitat with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to say the same as when we talk about self.
Sorry, Kat was coming in then, Dave. Your microphone's quite quiet, Kat, sometimes, you say so.
I was going to say, for me, it's about valuing the person rather than what they look like. And, I have 2 kids, and I always try and be very careful about what I'm saying, but I try and celebrate what the bodies can do, not what they look like. I tend to put the focus on that instead, rather than celebrating what they look like.
Yeah.
Because the body's an amazing thing, isn't it?
Oh, it really is.
Really. So I try and focus on that.
Yeah, for me, I think it's just remembering that your worth is not based on how you look or what you do. There are other factors involved there, and it's just about celebrating the beauty and being different or unique. Everyone is different, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Dave, do you want to come in as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's the same as when we always talk about self-esteem, is the fact that remembering that self-esteem does start with self. So your opinion on your body, your opinion on you as a person is the most important opinion out there. It's the one you hear the most. It's you literally are there giving yourself a sort of analysis, and maybe interrupt that analysis, like Hope was saying, like not always kind of like if you find yourself being unkind to yourself inside your own mind, it doesn't matter if the rest of the world changes to kind of make that more comfortable for you and to validate you. We're here to do that, but at the same time, you need to validate yourself, and it's about your relationship with your body at the end of the day. So the only way that you're ever going to feel better about yourself is when you start to feel better about yourself.
I'm just not going to follow that one up because that was a very deep answer, and mine will just not sound as sophisticated as that one. So the final question before we round it up is social media playing a part in the increase of eating disorders? I know that we've mentioned this briefly, but I thought it would be important to address this. And not just eating disorders as well, body image issues, body dysmorphia. Is social media playing a part in this? And this has actually been sent in by numerous people. It was worded in a slightly different way. But in particular, the people that have sent this in are parents of young children that potentially are struggling with an eating disorder or body image. And they do, from having conversations with these individuals, they do see that it's contributing to it, because quite often these young people, their children, are looking at these Instagram models and wishing that they look like them. So from all your perspectives, is social media playing a part? But I think as well, I don't want to be too negative about it, because there is a lot of positives out there.
I've just been sort of, just for my own general thinking really around sort of this whole topic, I just sort of been perusing some, there are other social media sites out there, some obvious ones to be fair. And I've been quite astounded how I've actually, I haven't shared, I haven't liked anything. I've just literally gone on and just, looked at this particular social media. Are you happy for me to say it? Can I?
Yeah.
So TikTok. So for me, it was just uninterested. Well, I'm fairly long in the tooth and a bit older than the rest of you. Well, let's have a look at TikTok. I'm absolutely astounded about virtually every other one for me was related to, here's my story about I'm on a calorie deficit and this is what I've eaten today in calorie deficit. And this is, and I think, why is that coming to me? Why is that constantly on this spiel and this reel that I'm looking at? And actually, there is, I guess, where there isn't any specific, maybe no, anecdotally, there isn't any evidence anecdotally, seeing that continuously impacts on you. It makes you think, oh, is that something that I might want to do? Actually, and you have to, as an individual, it's hard to then, if you're actually already struggling, to try and put that into perspective that actually, this isn't me, this is somebody different. What works for them won't necessarily work for me. But I guess if you're seeing that on a consistent basis, I can understand why there is some concern about the impact that might have on children and young people. Instagram, obviously, it's quite different. People are posting that look how beautiful I look, and look what I've, look what remedy or potion or lotion I've used to influence that. And it's there consistently, isn't it? And if somebody is spending a lot of time isolated without those connections, particularly during COVID, when, we were all attached to our phones and our devices, then I don't think we can avoid the fact that will be impactful. It's impactful on all of us.
I agree. Hope, do you want to come in? Because I know you do have to go shortly.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I think it can be really dangerous in places. I think there's a lot of, particularly on things like TikTok, where you don't really feel like you've got any control over what you're looking at. There is a lot of unhelpful stuff being circulated. But I think as well, like on top of that, what we have seen having a massive effect is actually people who with eating disorders who are talking about their experiences, which I think is great. I think it's, obviously I do it, so I obviously think it's great. But I do think it's really important. But at the same time, I think quite often people don't do it in a safe way. And so we're seeing a lot of people who maybe are struggling with food, who don't feel like they're deserving of that support because they don't look like someone they've seen on social media. And it's quite often the kind of the same people sharing. And I know that I'm the kind of typical kind of white middle class was a teenage girl who had an eating disorder. But actually we need to be, I think, on social media making sure that actually there's more diverse stories being shared, because if we're not sharing those, then people aren't going to reach out for support. So yeah, I think it can be dangerous. I think there's a lot that needs to be done. And I think one of the reasons it hasn't been done yet with social media is because people are kind of shying away from that content. And arguably anything on social media can trigger someone with an eating disorder. So it's like, actually, I think as individuals, yes, we need to be aware of those triggers. And actually, if we're being triggered by something, maybe we still have work to be done on our own recoveries. But at the same time, we then also need to be educating social media companies on actually, this is what's triggering, this is why it's having a negative effect on people, and then giving them the skills to actually develop resources that work for them. And I think kind of finally, like I do think with social media like that, obviously the people that run these sites are geniuses, like they're so intelligent doing tech work. And you think like, actually, if they can push out diet message on social media, like surely they can also be pushing out positive recovery messages or actually helpful messages, which is something that I think as a society and as kind of people who work in this space, it's this sort of stuff that we should be pushing for when we're looking at social media and making it into that safe space for people.
Dave, I feel like you wanted to come in with the... I can sense when you want to say
so
something.
Much. Just from a lot of what Hope said as well, is curate your social media feed. I know with TikTok you can't do that as well. TikTok sends you a lot of trash, but we need to be better social media users as well. So it's a two-pronged attack, really. It's getting people to use social media, post more responsible, but it's also getting people to consume more responsibly as well. So you can on Twitter, you can mute certain topics, you can mute certain words. If anyone doesn't want to watch the sex education spoilers that keep on coming up on Twitter right now, that's a good thing to mute. But you can mute things there so you don't see that. You can even on TikTok, you can hold down on when a TikTok comes up, if you hold the button on it, it basically will give you options to actually not watch that type of thing, and it'll give you the option to say I don't like this type of content or some words along to that.
Thank you, Dave. I did say I was long in the tooth and a novice. That's helpful.
I'd just like to come back on this, Dave, actually, and I'm sorry if this appears negative, but I've been working with a small group of young people recently that have done this on Instagram, but yet things have still been popping up.
Oh, things get through. A lot of things get through. That's the problem. The algorithms seem to be perfect when it's sowing political discourse, but it's like, but no, the things do still get through, but it will certainly minimize and reduce what that person's seeing. And that's the thing as well, is finding accounts that are actually finding and interacting with accounts that actually promote positive body image or positive eating practices. Jamila Jamil's I Weigh campaign, which is I Weigh as in WEIGH, I think is fantastic, because what they do for that is a person will put I weigh, but instead of their number, what they will put is their qualities. So now it's like, this is what I am. What I weigh as a person is my impact on the world, not my number on a scales. And I think that's fantastic because it gets a person to think about it. And if they're making one of those posts, you kind of got to say some nice things about yourself, which is it's a nice practice to get into.
I know we're coming up to the hour mark now. I think we'll finish on those questions, and the questions that haven't been asked that have been sent in to me, I will be contacting you via email privately. Is there any lasting words that anyone would like to say before we do round this up? I know we've just chucked a load of information there, so I hope that you've all found it incredibly useful, those that have watched.
I think my thing would just be, I'm sorry, I'm one of these people that always wants to say the final thing. But it is, I do think it just, I guess just to emphasize that, like, obviously we have talked about a lot of stuff today. And I know that some of the stuff we talked about for some people might be quite hard hitting, but also in some places we probably painted a bit of a stark picture of the way things are at the moment. But I do think it's important to kind of hold on to that hope that actually people can recover and that there is support out there. And sometimes we have to kind of really learn to champion and advocate for ourselves to get that support. So I guess kind of if you are struggling and you're listening to this or whatever, like, do go back to your GP, like go and push for that support and realize that actually no matter what size or shape you are, you deserve to have that support and treatment, and you can get better and live your life away from this.
Does anyone else want to add anything?
I think that just a quick one from my perspective, having, with us, obviously we have an eating disorder service, which we've also got obviously, in schools projects from yourself and developing in schools projects. Sam, it's just, for me, it's just, I guess willing people, if they've got issues, to use those contact points, to go to the GP, to alert services to some of those concerns. That early detection and that early prevention is key to, I guess, some of the recovery journeys the really positive recovery journeys we've heard today. Anybody else?
I think when Hope said before, obviously, that she represents like the stereotypical eating disorder, and there's not enough being spoken about. People generally they're surprised when I speak about it because I'm a man. But if you are listening and watching this, and you are from a sort of underrepresented community, and you have struggled with an eating disorder, please know that not only is there power in your story, but your story is needed and would help other people like that other people within your community to actually reach out and know that it's okay to actually reach out and get some help.
Perfect. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you to all of our wonderful guests. Really do appreciate your time. Really enjoyed this episode. I found it really informative myself. Hope and Rebekah, thank you for sharing both of your experiences and how difficult that can be at times. So if anyone has any questions following this webinar, then please email me on sam.tyrer, that's Tyrer, at lscft.nhs.uk. And on the YouTube description will be a list of services which you can contact if you do need some further information or support. So once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon, potentially with another bonus episode. Thank you.